Hello, everybody. We have over 560 guests joining us from 60 countries all over the world for this Masterclass talk from the Royal College of Art and Design for Good Academy. Before I introduce you to our esteemed guests, please allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. As you've probably noticed, today's session is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording at some point after the event. We aim to have a very interactive session, so we encourage you to submit any questions that you have for our panelists by using the Q&A button. And if you have any technical issues, please use the chat button to let us know. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dori Tunstall and Nick DeLeon. I'm going to hand you over to Nick, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Dori Tunstall to our first masterclass of this year's RCA and Design for Good Academy. Dori is a distinguished design anthropologist, a visionary design leader, and the celebrated author of Decolonizing Design. This is a cultural justice guidebook, as Dori describes it. Now, Dori, you are a true pioneer, challenging conventional design paradigms that can exclude, even harm indigenous cultures, Black and other diverse communities. You also have had, so far, a global career that's taken you from Chicago to Canada via Australia and now in Los Angeles. And this encompasses your role as professor of design anthropology at the University of Illinois at Chicago, making history as the first Black and Black female dean of a design faculty anywhere in the world when you were appointed to this role at OCAD University in Toronto. Dori, you've also been recognized with numerous prestigious awards, most notably and recently the 2022 Samisha Black Award for Distinguished Services to Design Education. So from me, a huge personal welcome, and also from all of my colleagues at the RCA and Design for Good. It's a real pleasure, Dori, to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to connect with you as always, Nick.
Well, I think my summary of just a few highlights of this illustrious career may have missed out on a kind of myriad of details, and especially your motivation for this journey that you've been on, your marvelous career to date, and all that's, I'm sure we'll hear about what's to come too. But do tell us a little bit more about your journey to becoming a design anthropologist and the leading voice in decolonizing design.
Oh, I think first I always have to explain what a design anthropologist is. And so think of me as someone who is seeking to understand how design translates human values into tangible experiences. So, and I've been one before I knew both the term design or anthropology. I'm a polymath, which means like I'm really interested in anything and everything. And so I got into anthropology because it was one of the fields where you can get away with studying everything from like, early hominids to like the architecture of, indigenous communities 65,000 years ago in Australia. So it was one of the most broad and encompassing fields, which is makes my mind go joyfully bursting with knowledge and information. And then design was when I realized that, I wanted to have impact on the way people experience the values that they think are important. Again, design is the field that really, again, makes it real and tangible and sustainable. So I really got into design because I wanted to be able to take that understanding of how people live and want to live and work with the people who can actually make that reality for them, right? So the movement into decolonizing design is that for the last 500 years or so, majority of the people of the world have experienced colonization. And so they want to experience this decolonial world. So I connect with and work with the people who are, again, interested in making these values, right, that came before decolonization, present and tangible in our world again. And so that's my journey.
No. In your book, I was intrigued. You called it a guidebook. In reading it, though, I feel a very strong sense of being guided to understand what might be called a kind of failure of perspective, and then a guide to action, Dori. So tell us a little bit about entitling it in that way as a guidebook. And, as we talked the other day as well about this sense of, as designers, we tend to see the world, although we talk of it through our customer or the user's eyes, we're still informed so much by our own innate biases and culture. So intrigued by your perception on this.
Well, I entitled it a guidebook because it was a thing that I wanted people to read it and then know what the next step to take. There so many conversations around decolonization, social justice, that's again, some of them are historical, so they go through what kind of people's experiences are, and there's a lot of history in decolonizing design. But I also knew that I wanted people to come out on the other side of that history, on the other side of my lived experiences and the lived experience with others, saying, okay, what can I do? I can do, this is the next step I can take. And I think it's a product in many ways, I think, of being a professor for such a long time, right? Because you want people to be able to act based on the knowledge that you're presenting. What's the assignment, so to speak? So the guidebook is really just making sure that people read it, felt it, right? And then knew what next steps they could take.
Now, in that book, you describe how modernist design kind of advanced a kind of the harmful project of colonization. You argue that we might address those harms by recentering both theory and practice towards indigenous cultures. And can you explain that a little bit more? And also the concept of liberatory joy, because I just love this expression. It fills one with a sense of optimism. There's a great sense. The thing I heard on the radio, and I think I might have mentioned it to you, but I know I've mentioned it to a lot of my students, and it was someone who said, I do not accept I'm a victim of circumstance. I am the remedy. And there's that kind of sense of positivity in this expression of, there are things we can do, but that sense of doing it with a sense of liberatory joy. So that's what I'd love to explore a little bit more, your reflections on that.
Well, I think let's talk a little bit about the failure perspective, because I loved when you said that term when we spoke the other day, because so the story that we tell about design is something that happened in Europe in the 1800s, and as part of that, it had two promises. The first promise was that through technology, the masses will have access to a better life. And then the second one is that if you get rid of your ethnic, national kind of markers and identity, then you can join this universal humankind. And again, on paper, this sounds so amazing. And when you read kind of the oratory that expresses this, you are deeply, deeply moved, right? But the failure of perspective in that beautiful articulation was that it was only meant for a very narrow group of people to actually experience, a better life through technology, to get rid of the German, English, French markers so that they can join, the EU, so to speak, right? So you have this idea that, again, is an amazing ideal, but through the failure perspective, the failure to extend that ideal to people around the world, the failure to understand that the better living through technology comes from stealing other people's land, because land is the most expensive thing, right? So by stealing other people's land, which makes it cheap, by enforcing a group of people, again, African peoples were chosen because they had immunity to European diseases, that in that process, they failed to embrace all of humankind in this articulation of an amazing vision. And through that process, they set up all these laws and structures that further exclude the rest of humankind from experiencing a better living through technology, from experiencing, again, not losing their identity in some ways, but again, by embracing the differences without hierarchy, that one actually can join a humankind. So the liberatory joy comes from that process of colonization. Did two things. It acts to separate us. And it doesn't allow, it seeks to enslave us. Like, again, I'm multi-generational African-American. So literally the capitalism and these processes sought to enslave my ancestors. So liberatory joy is the opposite intentionality of that, where liberation is being able to say no to things that are harmful to you, your community, to the environment itself, which is part of your community.
Yes.
And then joy is just connection, reversing all of that separation, reversing all of that hierarchy so that we can embrace each other as one, right?
I mean,
so
I think
it's the fulfillment of that promise, right, is what liberatory joy brings.
I think that's really eloquently described. But if we go back to the good life itself, of course, we create through design that sense of what the good life should be. But people have pursued the good life of the people that were a little bit richer than them. The good life that was not proscribed, but prescribed to them. But their means prescribed them from being able to reach it. The reason I use the term failure of perspectives is that perspective has a vanishing point. That vanishing point is where your eye rests as the primary spectator or viewer, or as the artist putting themselves into the picture. The failure of perspective is to realize there's more than one vanishing point in this perspective, that we have multiple vanishing points, and that we have failed to see that. We prescribed a good life. And as designers, we often will try and design what we think, despite all the personas and the research we do and consulting with anthropologists, we still gravitate towards that single good life. Do you think we have to dismantle what that means, recentering it? Because that's what I also drew so much from your book.
Yes. Oh, and that I think is in some ways the hardest task, but the one that designers are most equipped for. I mean, our ideal of a good life, it has two manifestations, right? Let's say, in many ways, we're trying to live the life of like a 1700s English king, right? And so we're, like you think of like the lawn as a manifestation, like this green lawn as a manifestation. Like, again, that image comes from a time and a place that is not natural to most places in the world. Yet this is what we're told we're to aspire to, right? So we do all of this work to try to create a life that belonged in a time and a place. And at that time, it was completely inaccessible to anyone who was not the king itself. So we've expanded that notion of like what all our houses are supposed to look like, castles or mini castles. We're supposed to have these lawns that use water without growing food. We're supposed to be dressed all in these royal jewels, right? To look blinged out in furs and velvets and all these things that were, again, just someone else's imagination of what a good life was. And that's, again, our failure of perspective, is to see like, well, actually, that image comes from a time and a place. At that time, I mean, the reason why you were king is that you were able to exploit the labor of everyone else in order to live that life. And now we've made that like a universal standard, which is why we're in this sustainability challenge that we're all experiencing, because no one can live. You can't have 8 billion people trying to live the life of aristocratic 1700 king, right? So the work of designers is help us to reimagine what a good life is. And it's the opposite of those things. It's about being in harmony with our natural environment, right? With, like with what indigenous cultures did is that they built these really brilliant check and balances between you are part of this natural world. You have obligations to sustain that natural world as an extension of sustaining yourself, right? It's about, again, the connections that we have to one another. It's about feeling a sense of purpose that aims you in a direction that benefits, again, everyone, right? So it's, like it's liberatory joy. Like that's the design brief, is create conditions for liberatory joy. But we have to reimagine a life in which our value comes from the depth of our connections, as opposed to the number of things that we've accumulated.
It's a different kind of wealth, isn't it? It's a kind of recognizing that wealth that lies in the richness of relationships, the depth of those, the extent of those as part of it. And that sense of relationships, not just with other people, but also with people, planet, and nature, all combined as part of it. And that means dismantling the kind of conventional hierarchies that we've become used to, that are economic systems in a way. And I can see people who are working in big corporations kind of just shifting on their seats a little. And I have to say, I have to shift a little as well, for two reasons. My career as a designer was in a global corporation, IBM, and we've got people from other global corporations who are sitting listening to this as well. Yet at the same time, those companies are beginning to recognize, and many have embraced the fact that they have to change. I'm also part of the Sustainable Markets Initiative, the initiative that was created by 250 global corporations. It was kind of instigated by a king, so we're back to the royalty again, but recognizing that there is no market to be the market leader of if you destroy your world. Right. That you have to be in harmony with that as well. So I think this dismantling, it's a kind of sense of how do we progress from one state to another without regressing massively, but being able to do it. Now, having gone on my little rant for a moment, I'm going to come back to yours, which is coming back to the indigenous communities who had found a balance, yet we, in many ways, through colonialism and industrialization, and then in the creation of global markets, supporting global brands, have kind of, if not erased, we have, in many ways, made it much harder for those indigenous communities to be able to thrive and stay with the values that sustain them. What do you think we can do? Is it just stepping away from that? Or do you think it's something that we as designers can help those communities prosper as designers in those communities, creating designs for, with, and their communities, not just us coming in as the kind of taking kind of global perspective. Yes, the savior. Back to
I mean, so again, I say this in the context, it's like I am not indigenous. So my positionality is as someone who is trying to live a life in solidarity with indigenous struggles for self-determination, for again, self-governance, sovereignty as the land itself. So what that means, and first chapter of the book, right, is putting indigenous first, and that means my approach to things is being in relationships with active indigenous communities and active indigenous people, so that I'm already connected in that relationship. Then there's where the guidance comes from, because then it's about understanding what it is that they want and need, and what gifts and talents that I have that can contribute to that, right? So it's not hero. It's like, if I want to be a good guest, right, then I'm going to lend my knowledge, skills, talents to my host, right? So that we can be in a harmonious relationship while I'm there, right? While I'm living there. So again, it's a thing where if I'm staying in someone else's house, I don't take over the house,
Yes.
but I will make my bed and I might wash dishes, or I might, participate in certain activities that then enhance the experience of my host as they're generously sharing so much with me. So that's the key in some ways, is to be in relationship and to be guided. Now, again, that, many indigenous communities are also in the process of trying to reconnect, because the process of colonization has, in some ways, caused a rupture in their knowledge, their language, their traditions. Again, and those things were done by design.
Yes.
So they're also in the process of reconnecting, reinterpreting, re-engaging. And again, this is the thing where like designers are so amazing, has such amazing skills, right? In terms of like, how can you contribute to the manifestation of that? How can you support that? Like, what are the messages that can be communicated? If you think of like, if you take like the marketing power of Coca-Cola,
Let's
and
try Pepsi Cola. They're in DFG.
or sorry, so Pepsi Cola then.
And welcome
right?
to everyone from Pepsi today.
Yeah. Hey, Pepsi. If you take all of that power and you put that to communicating and promoting the articulated needs of indigenous communities, like that, what a gift, right? What a gift that is. And again, it's challenging in the sense that, again, companies are on the side of doing harm in many cases. And then you have aspects of them that are trying to figure out how to get their company to move in the right way. And it's challenging to maintain that balance, because you have your own needs. Again, you have a mortgage you have to pay for, you have a car you have to pay for, there's education loans that you might have to pay for, there's family that you may have to provide for, right? And those are the things that make it harder to say no to things that might be harmful in the places that you're working. But I guess the thing is that like in the absence of having designers there who are trying to remind the institutions that they work in that this can be harmful, or even, Tony, like if you embrace this community in the way in which they want to be embraced, this is actually going to be beneficial, right? This will help us sell more of the things that they want and need. So you need designers there to help shift in many ways the balance in institutions between the harm they do and the benefit that they can provide, which again is not the benefit necessarily as defined by the institutions and the companies themselves, but going out and being connected, right, with indigenous communities to understand how they want to be embraced, and the best ways in which that can be done that provides benefit, right, for all.
Well, I think there's an immense opportunity here as well. I mean, I was looking through some work associated with the continent of Africa, and we can talk of it as a geographic continent, but it has the most incredible diversity, of course. But there are a couple of facts which are, really important here. The first is that, the average age in Africa, 19.1 years. And that means that the population of Africa will double between now and 2050. Now, that means it will become by 2050, with 3 billion people, the most populous continent.
The future is African.
and then the next aspect of it, because of the youth of Africa, it means 42% of the people of working age on the planet will be African. Now, these are really important elements, because as the world begins to shift on its axis in many ways, with all the things that we need to do and the opportunities, Africa cannot stay at 2 or 3% of world trade, which is what it is today. therefore, if it's got the workforce, it's got the capability, it has the potential to leapfrog, it is clearly a very substantial opportunity for investment. It's obviously a very important place to go and recenter for the workforce. It's a great new potential market, and its resources, whether it's in terms of solar energy, representing something like 70% of the world's solar energy capacity there in Africa. It's just an astonishing place of resources. But we have to make sure that from a design perspective, and from our role inside the corporations that have been so powerful, that we can exercise and generate value, both working with, in, and working, if you like, and I love your expression as being a good guest to Africa as well, as part of it. I mean, to me, this is something which, as designers, we every day we have to make design choices. Yeah. But we are the ones who come up with the creative options and the innovations that enable companies to prosper. And it is what we do, and our capacity to be able to create value and to create that growth for organizations that gives us power, but power that we have to exercise with real purpose. It's a very privileged position. So if you were a designer at, and we've got designers here, Nestle or Pepsi, at General Mills, what would your advice to them be to kind of shift the world? You know, we have a modest voice in the boardroom, but we have a lot of more than just voice. We have those ideas, that creative capacity which organizations need. Where would you suggest we put our energies?
Well, this is the part where I get this question a lot, especially working with like students and people who I mentor, but professionals as well. And for me, it's a thing where like the design brief is liberatory joy. So are you creating something that allows people to say no to things that will harm them? And then are you, again, creating connections that are genuine and mutually beneficial? Now, again, to achieve that, it's a bit challenging. So it's not like it's going to appear at once. But again, it's a thing where if the only field of agency you have is a choice of an image, then think about, like, again, can I select an image that brings liberatory joy? Meaning, making sure that the image is not harming anyone, not creating stereotypes about anyone, that is, again, reflecting an authentic representation of the complexity of a people, place, or thing that is being represented. Again, is the intent of the image and the message to connect people to one another as equals, right? Because the issue, let's say, the issue of bringing in Africa into the colonial project, like for a very long time, like people forget, like for a very, very long time until the 1800s in many ways, like Europe traded with Africa as equals. And then again, through the process of stealing the labor of African people, like I read this report, like the wealth of Europe before, in some ways, colonization and after colonization, that difference in wealth came directly from the enslavement of African peoples. Like that's the difference. And so again, it's like, it's a thing where we have to engage with Africa, but as an equal.
Yes.
Right. Listen to their perspectives of what it is that they want. Listen, again, don't come in with an intention of extraction, come in with an intention of sharing, mutual benefit, right? So your trade agreements should benefit equally.
Yes.
Not one group versus another. Now, again, as a designer, you're not necessarily in a position to make trade agreements, but what you can do is, again, the beautiful thing about design is that people who are not designers underestimate it. And so in stealth ways, I always find that you can really transform things by the design decisions that you're being asked to make that people don't necessarily understand the importance of, right? So again, if you come with this ideal of liberatory joy, am I creating a sense, am I preventing harm? That's the way to think of it. And am I deepening connections? Then every decision you make, whether it's for an image, for a layout, for a product, for an object, all of those decisions that you're making, if you're making it with that intentionality in mind, with that goal in mind, that like you'll chip away at some of the harmfulness, right? Because the values that are being put forth now are efficiency. The values that are being, and again, doing things faster normally means you're excluding the value of people's labor.
Yes.
Right? You're doing it, you're trying to make it go faster so that you don't actually have to pay people for the labor that it really takes to have it. And again, as designers, you experience that where it's something that actually takes 2 weeks. Someone says, okay, can you get it done in a week? And you figure out a way to do that. But that
Yes.
means you've lost a week in the value of your labor because it actually really was meant to take 2 weeks to do, right? So just to sort of say, it's the shift of the value systems that designers can begin to affect by not designing for efficiency, by not designing for extraction, right? But designing for connection and designing to not do harm. And it, again, you have to understand your own values of what a good life is, because the way in which, again, this ideal of living the life of aristocratic king from the 1700s in England, that living the ideal of living that life and the goal of trying to meet those expectations is how you get enslaved by that system. Right.
And we must not, as designers, get enslaved by those systems. I mean, we chose to be designers because we wanted to make a difference, not just a living.
Yeah.
I love your expression of, the stealth of design. I don't know if I'm going to nickname you now, Dori Tunstall.
But someone told me that I'm a assassin with a smile. And I'm like, I will own that. I will own that idea.
Right, we've got a number of new sobriquets for you as part of that. I think we've got quite a few questions that are building up here. So, Joe, can you share some of these questions with us and moderate? And let's see if we can engage and see how what the questions and the thoughts and the reflections that are on the mind of our massive audience here tonight.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Nick. We have a couple of questions, so I'm not going to do them in a particular order. We have a question from Emmanuel. How can I begin to practically decolonize design within my workplace?
So I think it's a step one is understanding your own risk position, because the act of trying to decolonize your institution, the institution will push back on that. So you have to actually understand your risk tolerance. Like I try to design my life in such a way that I can take on a lot of risk. So I don't own my home. I don't, again, my education is already paid for, so I don't have any, I have no debt. I actually have zero debt. So that's intentional in the sense of like not wanting to place myself where I have to say yes to something that is harmful because I'm trying to figure out how to keep my house or keep my car or keep my X, Y, and Z, which again is not to say that you can't have these things. It's just me figuring out my risk tolerance. Once you figure out your risk tolerance, like how much you're able to risk losing of the good life, so to speak, then it's figuring out who your allies are in the institution, having in some ways like the quiet conversations with people to understand, are they willing to join you in the risk? Because when you risk as an individual, 9 times out of 10, the institution will squash you, right? It is designed to do that. But if you risk as a group, it becomes harder for the institution to squash. It becomes harder for the institution to stop in some ways what impact you're trying to have. So the second thing is to figure out who your allies are. And then once you have that, you have, again, the strategy. And the intent is just really to think about it. I'm just trying to dismantle a hierarchy that says there's this vision of the ideal person. There's this vision of an ideal culture. There's this vision of an ideal good life that everyone is being forced to live up to because we've said that this is the top of it. So beginning to dismantle that, like every decision that you can take that dismantles that hierarchy, that changes, again, that failure of perspective in terms of who and what matters. That's the work that you can do absolutely every day. Small micro actions that lead, because you're in community doing it, leads to further shifts, right, in the institution.
Thank you very much indeed, Dori, for that. Sorry, Joe, I'm going to go back to you. You've got a few other questions there as well.
We have another one from Francis Rowland. The point about Afrofuturism is a good one, but isn't there yet another wide open risk of colonialism and extraction?
Yes, there is always the risk of colonialism and extraction. I mean, and this is the part where, again, let's say if you're on the design strategy side, so I exist on the design strategy side, where I'd say a lot of my brain power is devoted to trying to figure out how do I move as quickly as the structures and processes of harm, right, that exist. There is going to be, and there has been, consistent attempts to establish a hierarchy of being, right? Like, again, we talk about European colonization, and that's just the most recent example of it. Like, this has gone on, from time immemorial. If we were back, 4,000 years ago, we would be complaining about the Egyptians and how are they taking over the world or whatever. So again, it's a thing where this desire among human beings to establish a hierarchy is I think something that is deeply present as a creature, right? The things that cultures have done, many indigenous cultures have done, recognizing that, is to design their culture to counteract that. Like, for me, the brilliance of something like the potlatch, which is of the cultures of like the West Coast of Turtle Island, so United States, Canada, was that they understood the human desire to accumulate, right? So you have a leader who would accumulate. And so they said, okay, at the end of that accumulation, this leader has to give everything back, give everything up. And the mechanism of control in that is that they have to give away everything, which means that leader is now dependent on everyone in the community for their needs, which means if they were a poor leader, that it's not going to come back in generosity. If they were a good leader, then again, they don't have to worry about giving out everything because they've built the relationships so that they will have a return, that people will care for their needs, as when they were a leader, they cared for others. So I articulate this to say that the desire to establish hierarchies, again, exists. It is actually the work of culture that then, again, designers make tangible and manifest, that helps us squash that human need in some ways to create a sense of hierarchy over everything. And and whether that work happens in Africa, India, again, Turtle Island, that is the work of being human beings who are trying to do the right thing. And designers are well equipped and being able to facilitate that journey for people.
Thanks ever so much. I've seen a particular question here, Joe. I'm going to just interrupt you for a moment as well, which I think is a really intriguing one from Mulsari Jain. How do you help a client actually broaden their design brief to consider the social impact and not just their marketing sales goals? Please offer some very practical guidance on this. I've got some ideas on that as well, but I shall give you you go first on that one.
Yeah. So my engagement in industry is I worked for ARC Worldwide. I've worked with Sapient Corporation, like back when we were trying to figure out what the internet was going to mean for business, culture, community. My role was a user experience strategist or user experience modeler, depending on the term. And my job in the company was to provide that perspective by bringing in, ethnographically speaking, bringing in the perspectives of the customers. But I was always very careful about the customers that I sought to bring in terms of, again, all the different notions of diversity, but in sophisticated ways. For example, there was one project where the client was actually interested in it's a hair care product. They were interested in well, again, what they say, it is sort of white and Asian, because they weren't really interested, they said, in the product for curly hair. Now, again, the way in which I approach that is like, how do I broaden the perspective? Is like, okay, you're doing a little stereotyping there. So why don't we do the recruiting not by racial ethnic group, but by the type of hair that people have, which then ended up presenting this really diverse group of people who had the type of hair that they were asking for, but without that assumptions that they had about who would have that type of hair. And so, again, it was a thing where, like, when my favorite moments in consulting was when you see the eyes of the client kind of like brighten up and their horizon expand because you introduce them to a perspective that they, again, just the way they live, how they organize themselves, they may not have been able to understand or embrace. And that is, I think, designers now are trained in ethnography. It is a core skill of design now. So again, trying to find ways to bring those perspectives that challenge the understandings of the institution is one of the ways in which you begin to do that. Because again, what that does is dismantle this hierarchy that says, oh, this is the only clients that we are seeking to embrace. It dismantles the notion that these people don't have anything of value to who we are, or what we're trying to do, or what we're trying to be. So research, in many ways, is one of the major tools to begin to do that, and to design your research to intentionally engage with perspectives that challenge the perspectives of the institution is one of the ways in which you can do that.
And like I think, again, your comment about stealth. By doing this, people don't need to know you're doing it. They probably don't even discern you did it. But the people who will be the recipients of it will experience it and know it was meant for them too. And I think that's the great thing about all forms of inclusive design. Universality doesn't mean it's like everything is homogeneous as though it's being put in some great liquidizer. Universal design is creating things that kind of can work for all kinds of different communities, but in their own special way too, as part of it. So a little bit to add as well from my side on it. There was a question here as well, which again, Joe, forgive me for kind of picking into this one quickly, but how to bring global South talents, knowledge, contribution to design to the table outside the kind of the sobriquet of being exotic I quite like this question as well. And how do we deal with the kind of assumptions and stereotypes about the global South as well? Because I think, it can be easy to talk about it because you watched a YouTube video or, an NPR documentary, or CNN or whatever, or BBC. But it's something else to have it as part of both the lived experience. And also, I look at the RCA. We are very rich in being able to draw people from so many different countries, from the global South, as well as other parts of the world too. But I like this question, labeling it as is too easy to be labeled exotic. And I wondered whether, Dori, you have a kind of personal reflection on that too.
So I think it's important. So there's two pieces of work that has to be done. I think on the one hand, and this work is being done. So I say this with an understanding that this work is being done. But I think first is really doing the work to figure out what is a good life in the places where you are, that is in some ways, again, decolonized from the European notion of a good life, which again, through colonization has been imposed in many ways on the global South, right? So really digging in to figure out what that good life is, that's distinct from that idea, is the first step. The second step, in many ways, then is using all the tools that we have available through technology to amplify that ideal as much as possible. I don't know how long ago, I feel like it was like 10 years ago, there was the one contest where they were taking ideas from the global South in terms of like how to solve the problems of the global North, so like aging. Yes. And I love that initiative because it was a way to show that the global South has its own perspective on how the world works, and was a vehicle to, in many ways, amplify that. Now, again, in terms of like how many projects were implemented, that's always the challenge. But again, as a project to flip that idea of what is a good life, what are the true values, it was a really important one for me as a person living in the global North to see and understand and experience that. The third thing that has to happen, and this is a thing where, again, you realize like the colonial structures are so powerful, is like, if the global South built up the global South instead of this North-South exchange, like I guess a East-West, Southeast-Western exchange, then, and again, we understand the structures of colonial extraction, and we understand all the structures in place that actually effectively tries to keep that from happening. But really, everything comes from the global South. Everything that feeds the global North comes from the global South. So what if the global South fed each other instead of feeding the global North, right? And that goes to the implementation side of things, right? Where, okay, you can have a clear vision of, again, what a good life is that's distinct from this European colonial vision. You can be articulating that as much as possible, but setting up the infrastructure to make that real and tangible, and sharing across to bring, again, a sense of equity, and in meeting, again, that ideal of a good life that's not the aristocrat from the 1700s. That is how the world will transform. It is actually the only way forward, in rebalancing the world. And again, as designers who understand how these institutional structures work, as designers who, again, have access to all of the tools, like if you're a designer from connect it to the global south, like you are the future of transformation, right? Like you are the heroes in many ways. And what all the rest of us has to do is, again, is be in solidarity with that movement, be in solidarity with that change that has to happen. Like it has to happen, because there's no way to go forward as a planet alive unless that transformation happens.
Thank you so much, Dori. We've got time, I think, to squeeze in just one or two more questions, but we will do our absolute best to get back to all those who've given their questions today, and give you the best responses we can. I've got Anthony Flores. Hey, Dori. Anthony Flores, he's currently a student at the Royal College in VisCom. My question is, what advice would you give to brown voices within design dealing with harmful microaggressions and tokenism within existing structures? And I have to say, I do hope, Anthony, that's not something you're experiencing at the RCA. If it is, come and speak to me later about it, and I will do absolutely everything. But this is something that I think many people can associate with in their organizations that they've been working in, as well as through their education and their academic journey so far. So what is your perspective on it? What have you done to, I'm sure you have faced many of those microaggressions, maybe not just so micro.
So the book I'm working on right now is called Super Tokens, Lessons from the First and Onlys in Design and Tech. And it comes from chapter 4 of the Decolonizing Design book, where I describe a super token as an individual from structurally marginalized identities whose talents are so desired by those institutions that the institutions overcome the aversion to their identities in order to have access to those talents. So that's what a super token is. So you're describing the experience of a super token. What I'm learning through my own lived experiences, and now I've done 25 of the 50 interviews that I want to do for the book, is one, to understand that first of all, they're rejecting your identities. Because I think and I guess might be my approach to institutions is like just being older and wiser and having more experience, is that I come into an institution understanding that I'm going to experience rejection. There's like the pet to the threat phenomena that has been described, particularly I think it affects a lot of people, but particularly Black women. Like, again, I'm highly talented. People love what I bring, hate the fact that I'm the person bringing it. So when I come into an institution, I understand that. And there's 3 things that I do in order to protect myself. First, I build community. And if I can't find community inside the institution, then I build community outside the institution, because I need someone to tell me that who I am matters, right? That who I am matters, because my experience in the institution is trying to tell me that who I am doesn't matter. Second is, again, understand your risk tolerance in terms of being able to confront the institution and hold the institution accountable. This means documenting everything. Like, people have told me this, so I'm just repeating, like, always keep a journal. If every encounter that you have that feels a little off with you, again, respond back just with a summary of like, I think you were trying to communicate to me in this particular way. And they may not respond to you, but what it does is it begins to leave a trail of evidence, because, again, part of this is we still rely on the written word. And then I would say, especially for educational institutions, understand what you are there for. It would be lovely if you could find belonging in institutions. But I also understand that most of the institutions, especially elite institutions, again, are not designed to be able to embrace me fully, right? Now I can advocate for that work to be done. Again, tactics that have worked, advocating for faculty who you can go to and who can reaffirm your identities. Again, bringing in, advocating for a special guest, right? If your institution is not willing to hire full-time, bringing in special guests who can serve that purpose for you within the institution. But the thing is, I would say, is that it's not on you, right? You are there to learn. And again, the racism and the microaggressions, they do distract your ability to learn, but that is the fault of the institution. So again, connecting with those people within the institution who can serve in allyship or solidarity, who you can go to and trust, and have them do the work of trying to force the institution to embrace you and be more accountable for the learning journey that you need to have to feel safe. That is, your job is to inform those people of your experiences, but it is not your job to make the institution less racist and less harmful, right? You're there to learn and to set up the support systems that you need to allow you to learn. Again, that's where your energy should be in terms of, again, making and finding community, so that you can focus on the learning. And so these are the things that I'm learning. It's all about community, because it goes back to the statement I said before, as one individual. And again, the institutions as a super token will want you to be only one individual, right? Because it makes it easier for you to feel that you can't say no to things that are harmful, right? So finding that community that helps you say no to that which is harmful, is the only way in which we hold our institutions accountable to change, so that we don't have to say no to things.
Dori, thank you very much indeed for those reflections. And whether it's you're in academia, you're working in a global corporation, you're working for yourself, you've joined us as a friend of the RCA, or because you were just fascinated to hear from Dori today. If you face those kinds of challenges, call them out, come together, and engage. If you ever experience any of that at the Royal College of Art, then call it out to us, of course. But what we want to do is to make sure that everyone, both at the Royal College of Art, who's part of Design for Good, has got their eyes on that goal of achieving closeness and richness of relationships, creating human value, not just economic value, recognizing that we need to be in harmony with people, planet, and nature, and that because we chose to be designers, we must be part of the remedy. If we face any aspect of becoming a victim of anything, we must call it out. But then beyond the part of how do we remedy, not revenge, remedy. That's what we are as designers. And Dori, I want to thank you for an absolutely enthralling, inspiring, eye-opening session today. Thank you. I'm sorry we've not been able to answer all the rich and wonderful questions that have emerged from it, but it's been a rich and enjoyable experience, Dori, to have you with us this afternoon. Please, everyone, join me in thanking Dori. Applaud from your home. We'll make the earth shake, but thanks everyone indeed. And Joe, I'm going to pass back to you, but Dori, my sincerest thanks to you for a most marvelous session today. Another masterclass, and we've got more coming up soon. But Dori, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dori and Nick, for sharing your insights and expertise. But I would like also to thank everyone who joined us for today's talk, and the RCA and the Design for Good Academy for hosting this series of free masterclass talks. The next free webinar talk in this series is scheduled on the 10th of December with Professor Ron Wakari, founder of the Everyday Design Studio, in conversation with Dr. Phillips and Dr. Delfina Fantini Van Titmar from the RCA. I'll remind everyone that we will share a link to the recording of the session at some point later this week. Thanks for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.